Justin Weltley, who's going to be introducing our speaker, Dr. John Quinn, who is presenting tonight on one of 2 book projects that he is involved in. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Teresa. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Mercy Week. We're in the latter parts of Mercy Week. Oh, can't hear so well. Is that a little better? Okay, there we go. So it's a privilege today to be able to introduce Professor John Quinn for our faculty lecture today on Building Bridges, Mercy Ministries in Newport since 1854. Dr. Quinn has been on the faculty at Salve for 32 years. I used my calculator for that one. He's a professor of history, specializing in modern Irish history and American religious and ethnic history, and teaches courses on topics including the historian's craft, France since the Revolution, Hitler and the Holocaust, and the American immigrant experience. As a member of the Macaulay Institute's Interdisciplinary Faculty Collaborative on Immigration, Dr. Quinn is also developing a new course on Asian American immigrant history. Dr. Quinn is the author of over 30 articles and essays and 2 books. His first book was built on the work of his dissertation, Father Matthew's Crusade, Temperance in 19th Century Ireland and Irish America. And his most recent book is centered in local history, The Rise of Newport's Catholics, from colonial outcasts to Gilded Age leaders. Both are published by the University of Massachusetts Press. And Dr. Quinn's work on his most recent book, as well as his current project on the history of Salve Regina University itself, underwrite the research for today's lecture. Dr. Quinn received his bachelor's degree from Georgetown University, magna cum laude, and master's and doctoral degrees in history from the University of Notre Dame. And anyone who has joined Dr. Quinn on a history walk through Salve's campus or Newport's neighborhoods, had him in class, or benefited from his generous and insightful public talks, or just a friendly conversation, know that we're in for a treat this afternoon. Dr. Quinn is a scholar of the highest level, whose carefully researched accounts bring insight into the pastness of the past, but also its presence. As a historian and a person of mercy, John's scholarship excavates the treasures and challenges in such a way that we all become more human in their challenge. So please join me in welcoming John Quinn for Building Bridges, Mercy Ministries in Newport since 1854.
Better? Sister Betty, you hear me okay? I remember one of the first talks I gave here at Salve, I talked to people at the end and I said, how did you like it? She said, I don't know, I couldn't hear a word you said. Okay, I'm gonna remember to make sure. So if anybody can't hear me, if I fade, please let me know. Thank you, Teresa, for that really gracious, kind introduction. Thank you very much. And I want to thank lots of library people for today. I want to thank Dawn for helping me, and Lydia for helping me organize, Beth for putting posters together, and then Liza. I don't know if Liza's here, but Liza's the archivist downstairs. She's always finding obscure answers for me whenever I go down to her. In the garden level. I think I accidentally said the basement. She's in the garden level. So as Teresa said, there are these 2 projects I've been working on, And originally I was thinking of just talking about the Mercy Sisters as been come up in the book. The book goes up to 1930, so I wanted to talk about them from 1854 to 1930. And then I got this brilliant idea, maybe a month ago. I thought, well, I'm working on this other project that's all about the Mercy Sisters, and it really starts around 1930, so why don't I just like keep going and take it closer to the present? And I came up with this kind of catchy title, Building Bridges, and I was going to show that the sisters, you know, over time really got more and more accepted in Newport, were welcomed and helped to bring, you know, different populations together. And I thought that sounded really good. And then I started doing the research and I realized that's really not what's happened at all. So, so I think I need a new title, but anyway, you'll see it. Any thoughts on our cover slide? What do you think? This is the Salve bookstore, right? Anybody want to think, what would you think date-wise on that? Early 60s, I'm thinking. And if we have this right, then the bookstore was in the basement of Ochre Court. So this would have been the basement of Ochre Court. Garden level. This is the garden level. And Lois Evelyn identified the Sister Rosina, Mary Rosina, anyway, in the music department. That's what Lois told. Okay. All right, well, let me back up. So we're going to basically start in 1854, but I want to back up a little further than that. In the early 19th century, America was in a welcoming mood. 5 million people in the country in 1800. There was plenty of room for immigrants. By the 1830s, however, the mood was changing. Irish immigrants, almost all of them Catholic, began to arrive in the Northeast in droves. Most had no skills, and many of the men seemed to be inclined towards alcoholism. The number of Irish immigrants would only increase further in the 1840s with the failure of the potato crop, the one plant which half of Ireland's farmers were entirely dependent on. The nativist reaction began. Very harsh cartoons started to appear in the press, and no Irish need apply language started to appear in want ads. These are, I don't know if anybody's seen these. These were cartoons that were done by the Illustrated London News. They sent a person over to do these pen and ink sketches, and they're just so poignant. But you know, they always see nobody has shoes or kind of rags, so they're really striking. So no Irish need apply language starts to appear. I have that. People can make that out. A young man wanted from 16 to 18 years of age, able to work, no Irish need apply. This would be a Boston newspaper, late 19th century. And of course, those words became so commonplace in the ads that they actually shortened it and just said N-I-N-A. Because you didn't want to waste, you know, you had to pay per letter, right? So everybody knew what N-I-N-A meant. So there's all this animosity towards the Irish Catholic immigrants. And what I didn't realize is it seemed to center on the few communities of nuns that were established in the United States at this time. Nuns were single women living together. Non-Catholic Americans had no familiarity with sisters. Why weren't they getting married? Why weren't they having children? Why were they dressed the way they were? And why were outsiders not allowed inside their buildings? This becomes the key sticking point. The nuns had a strict cloister in those days. And so the convent was closed to visitors, and that made a lot of Protestants very worried, sort of suspicious about what's going on beyond these doors. Well, the first trouble spot was at Charlestown, just north of Boston. The Ursuline sisters had a brick convent and girls' boarding school sitting on 22 acres with terrace gardens and fruit trees. Really a beautiful place, and it was really the showpiece for American Catholics in the 1820s and 1830s. And now, of course, Charlestown is part of Boston. Now it was a separate town. But where this stood would be right close to the Bunker Hill Monument. People would know where that is on the Freedom Trail, so that's kind of the spot. So it's a beautiful location. In the summer of 1834, a rumor spread that a nun named Sister Mary John was being held inside the walls against her will. When a crowd surrounded the convent, the Mother Superior adopted a defiant tone, saying it's a cloister. And she said, and we have thousands of Irishmen to protect this cloister. Well, that didn't go over well with the men in the crowd who had already been drinking. So the Mother Superior's refusal was all they needed to hear. They took torches and set fires to buildings, causing the nuns and the schoolgirls to flee for their lives. The rioters destroyed the gardens and orchards and even dug up the graves of the deceased nuns. There was a little graveyard for the sisters up there. When the riot was over, there was widespread indignation about what was termed an outrage. There were lots of these sketches of the convent in flames. Nowhere was there more anger than in Newport, where the residents prided themselves on their religious diversity and tolerance. A group of Newport residents wrote to the Bishop of Boston, inviting the sisters to relocate here, where they said religious freedom runs in the streams and floats in the breeze. The bishop was interested, but the rioters had done $50,000 in damage and he had no insurance on the property. So the school was never rebuilt, and the sisters were never able to reestablish their convent. They had to move to existing convents in Canada and Louisiana. The people of Newport would have to wait another 20 years before any sisters would come here. After Charlestown, nuns continued to be the scapegoats for Catholicism. A Canadian woman calling herself Maria Monk said she had escaped a convent in Montreal and had come to New York. She said the priests were forcing themselves on the nuns, getting them pregnant, and then the nuns were killing the babies after they were born. They would baptize the babies first and then strangle them. Monk said she didn't want her baby boy killed, so she escaped the convent with him. She wrote up her story called The Awful Disclosures of the Hotel Jude Nunnery. Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk. And this was really shocking. The book sold 300,000 copies before the Civil War. Just as a comparison, I was looking at Frederick Douglass's narrative, which is a key work, of course, at that time, 30,000. But Harriet Beecher Stowe has her beat out. It wasn't the more copies of Uncle Tom's Cabin. She became a very popular speaker on the lecture circuit. Then her mother intervened from Canada and said, Maria was never a nun. We're not Catholic. And Maria had been in an asylum for prostitutes for several years. So just to set the record straight. So, and the home for wayward girls was run by sisters, so she had this encounter with sisters, but she was never a sister herself. The mother added that Maria had suffered a brain injury which affected her judgment capabilities. So Maria was discredited, but not before hundreds of thousands of copies of the book were sold. The Mercy sisters were affected by this hysteria as well. In 1851, they came to Providence to set up a convent. Oh, I've got one. There's a few others of these books. This is The Priests in Pursuit of the Nun. The nuns trying to escape from the convent, and you probably can't see it, but there's a couple of priests in the background chasing her out. So those are the kind of books that are coming out in large numbers. When the Mercies, when they came to Providence, set up a convent, they set up a school called St. Xavier's Academy, and they set up an orphanage in the next year. In 1855, the Mercy Convent in Providence was surrounded by a mob of 3,000 angry men who thought that a nun was being held inside against her will. And again, you're not allowed in to inspect it. After the mayor of Providence stepped in and police forces were brought in, they were eventually able to get the crowd to disperse without torching the convent. This was a close call. It was a standoff that lasted for hours, and eventually, somehow, it de-escalated, and the building was still standing. And this, if I have this right, this is now part of J&W, Johnson and Wales, and I think it's a dorm now. I think they call it like Xavier Hall or something like that. That's the chapel, so it still stands, but part of Johnson and Wales. So that's what's going on in Providence. That's what's going on in Boston. Newport, things are very different. 1854, the pastor of St. Mary's, Father Fitton, invited the Mercy Sisters to take over the parish school. When Mother Frances Xavier Ward, the American founder of the Mercies, learned of the opportunity in Newport, she wrote excitedly to a priest friend in Connecticut. Next May, we propose having a local house at Newport, the second city in the state. We'll have a fine free school there. The climate there is so delightful that it's called the Eden of America. A fine, benevolent lady of high rank and good fortune, Miss Harper of Baltimore, will assist us in getting up that establishment. Her mother has a beautiful summer residence there. So she's referring to the Harpers. The Harpers had a mansion on Bellevue and Narragansett, where the traffic light is. If you think of the man seated, that statue, and think diagonally across, that's the Harper mansion. No longer it's condos. I don't know what's there, but it was supposed to be a beautiful mansion. So Mother Xavier, who was a close associate of Catherine Macaulay from Ireland, she sailed down to Providence, from Providence with 4 sisters, and got the sisters set up, and then got back on the boat and went back to Providence. Right from the start, the sisters had a good experience in Newport, very different from what was happening with sisters in most of the rest of New England. Just a couple of months after the troubles in Providence, the Mercy Sisters in Newport received 2 young women into their community as postulants. So those would be the new kind of temporary members. The Newport Daily News said the ceremony drew an immense crowd made up mostly of curious Protestants. And the reporter said it was a solemn and imposing occasion and one which will not soon be forgotten. So a totally different experience here, right? As opposed to Charlestown or Providence and even Philadelphia, where a convent was torched in Philadelphia as well. So my theory is, I think the initial welcome would be attributed to Newport's religious tolerance history, right? You have a Jewish community here from the 1650s. You have Quakers here at the same time that Boston is hanging Quakers, right? On Boston Common, they're playing a leading role in Newport. So that's the tradition, and so they were welcoming to the sisters as well. However, I think the Mercy's sisters make a really good impression once they get here, and then that adds to the positivity because of their work they were doing in the schools. Well, for the first decade in Newport, the sisters must have been very crowded because they were running the school out of the convent, so they have no school building. Over in the 1860s, the new pastor, Father William O'Reilly, built a beautiful school building up next door to the church. And the interior was supposed to have painted walls and frescoed ceilings, just a beautiful building. Oh, here we go. So here's Mother Xavier looking kind of stern. What do we got? She's the American founder and one of Catherine McCauley's close associates. She's headquartered in Providence. And that's one of the few photos we have of early Mercies in America. And this, I know my picture didn't come out that great, but this is the cornerstone for St. Mary's School. And I just happened to see it when I'm walking on Spring Street. I was at the library in Newport. And I don't know if you can make that out, but it says erected by the Catholics of Newport, AD 1865. If not, just take my word on it. But they decided to put the cornerstone way up top instead of down at the bottom. So that becomes their new schoolhouse, beautiful. Well, rather than use the extra space in the convent just to spread out, the sisters then decided to open a small co-ed school in the convent, which they called St. Mary's Academy. And this, I didn't understand this distinction, but when they speak of an academy in the 19th century, that means they're charging tuition. It's not a free, like I was just saying, a free school, so a free school versus that. So the academy would teach more specialized subjects to the students, including bookkeeping. They would learn foreign language, music. It was a little more elite. I think like LaSalle Academy, Bayview Academy. You think of these schools from the 19th century, they have that term academy. So the sisters are now running a free grammar school and an academy, and still don't have a lot of space. Well, I was saying the sisters really made a positive impression on the community, and there's a couple of examples of that. The state's leading newspaper, the Providence Journal, was not known for sympathy towards immigrants. It was tended to be nativist. This is what they had to say. There's probably no order in the Roman Catholic Church that is so universally known and admired for their piety, zeal, and self-sacrifice as the Sisters of Mercy. So that's coming out of the Providence Journal, 1876. And then I also saw in the newspapers there's a lot of references to efforts to raise money for the sisters in Newport. There would be these entertainments, and the big entertainment center would be the Opera House. People know the Opera House down on Washington Square. That's where you would have a concert, a lecture, and so, and I found that sort of interesting that was arranged by the women of St. Mary's. This was something that the women did, and what I hadn't really thought about is most of the clubs in the 19th century were sex segregated. So like most of the Catholic organizations were for men. So like the Knights of Columbus, the St. Vincent de Paul Society, that was a men's club, the Temperance Association, even the Literary Association was a club, that was for men, right? So working with the sisters was one of the women's projects. So the women in the parish would organize the events, hire the speaker or the singer, and then they'd sell tickets, and they raised considerable sums of money for the sisters. And hundreds of people would go to the Opera House to hear some event for the Mercy fundraiser. Another indicator of the sisters' popularity was the city's response to the death of a Mercy nun. Sister Mary Basilia, whose birth name was Margaret Duffy, died in Newport in 1876 at the age of 28. And she had some infectious disease and died very quickly, very suddenly. And there was just this dramatic outpouring of sympathy for the sisters. The Newport Daily News ran this long poem in honor of her. And then the Providence Journal had extensive coverage of the funeral mass. And so you could just tell she had made an imprint on the people of Newport. By 1880, the sisters had a new convent to live in, designed by Dudley Newton, one of Newport's premier architects. Yes, I know it's kind of interesting. St. Mary's Academy, in the Newport Historical Society, they have these little brochures that are the little graduation booklets. And you can get a sense here, it was a small group who would have gone to the Academy. Distribution of premiums, what are there, 8 people, and so the Academy was much smaller than the elementary school. But these are neat little booklets that are found in the Historical Society. Okay, so St. Mary's Convent, so there it is. Notice it has a different purpose now, right? Admiral Fitzroy Inn on Thames Street, that's St. Mary's Convent, designed by Dudley Newton. Dudley Newton, 2 years after finishing the convent, he designed Waker. So, busy man. This convent, 3 stories high, cost $80,000 to build, and will serve as a convent for over 100 years. And then my work-study student, Becca Dawson, went out and took this photo for me. That's a little plaque across the street from St. Mary's. That shows you where the convent originally was, and then it was moved down to Thames Street. I don't know if people can read that. 1854 to 1984, over the Sisters of Mercy. Okay, well, in the later phase of the Gilded Age, so 1880s and 90s, Catholic population was really going to grow in Newport. The community was heavily Irish, but now there were starting to be some Italians and Portuguese as well. Most of Newport's population was geared to the summer colony. The mansions needed maids, cooks, butlers, gardeners. Just to take one example, the Elms on Bellevue Avenue, 36 full-time people living in. It's just for a married couple, 2 people, no kids, just 36. And there were other staff too, but 36 live in. Other people were involved in building the cottages, extending the roads, providing services to the mansions, flowers, ice, all kinds of things. As the Catholic population swelled, St. Mary's Church was split twice. First in 1885, St. Joseph's on the north, which is now on Broadway, and then in 1911, St. Augustine's Church set up in the 5th Ward neighborhood. The first pastor of St. Augustine's, Father Martin Reddy, had served at St. Mary's, and he knew the Mercy Sisters who were teaching at the school. So as soon as he got to St. Augustine's, he contacted the Mercy Sisters and said, could you send another group of Mercy Sisters to teach at my school? And they said yes. So a group of 6 Mercy Sisters came to the 5th Ward and launched St. Augustine's Elementary School in 1912 on a very short notice. In the fall, 6 of them started up with 337 students. So imagine that. That's a big school that kept going. Here's St. Augustine's Church. 3 years later, the Bishop of Providence, Matthew Harkins, came down from Providence to look at an old mansion on Malbone Avenue called Eagle Crest. That would be near the old casino, the High Line, and also the Newport Daily News building. I don't know what that is now, but if people know where we are there. The diocese owned it, and he wanted the Mercy Sisters to set up an orphanage there, because the diocese was recognizing that not everyone was prospering in Gilded Age Newport. The sisters already operated one in Providence called St. Aloysius, but the bishop wanted a second one for the southern part of the state. The Mercy Provincial toured the grounds with him and agreed to send a group of sisters down to set up an orphanage. She asked for some renovations first, and he agreed. And so in 1950, the Mercy Home and School opened up. Started with 34 students, and it never got really big. I think it peaked at about 90 students. Typically 4 or 5 sisters were working in it. So now we have 3 different communities of sisters all in the city, of Mercy Sisters, right? St. Augustine's Convent, St. Mary's Convent, and now the Mercy Home. The school was, I think, very interesting. It was co-ed. Let's see what I have here. Oh yeah, that's the bishop, and then in back was the sister who was the head of the school. Co-ed, open to all religions, and also racially integrated. And I think that's kind of striking at this time, because Newport really is not racially integrated in the 19-teens and 20s, not so much. I went through the records of the Mercy Home, and I was surprised to learn it's not a full-fledged orphanage. At least what I was surprised to find is sometimes it would say that the sisters had decided to expel a child, and they said that we're going to call his mother and have her take him home. So now what I think is, I think in some cases you had single parents who were trying to raise the kids, or if they were a family was having financial problems, they would have the kids board at the school, but it wasn't a full-fledged orphanage. But I was hoping, I have some more. This is a picture of Eagle Crest. This is a mast, an outdoor mast in this house, and that's the first mansion they're going to be at. But there were some great pictures in the Newport Daily News, and you could see it. There were white children, African American children. There also were kids I thought might be special needs. They looked like some kids had handicaps that the school had taken into, and I think there probably wouldn't have been many options for kids with special needs in the 1920s. So it was, I think, really an interesting place. The home ran for 26 years. In 1920, it moved to another mansion across the street called Castlewood, 52 acres. And that's, just beautiful. They found it. And they stayed in Castlewood until 1941, when the Navy claimed it and said they were going to turn it into a bachelor officer's quarters. And so once the Navy said they want something, that's it, So the sisters had to shut the orphanage down. So by the end of World War II, the Mercy presence in Newport was reduced, because here the orphanage is gone. The academy that we were talking about a few minutes ago, the sisters had shut that down because there were two new high schools on Bellevue Avenue by the 1920s. One was called De La Salle for boys, and St. Catherine's Academy for girls, which was right on the corner of Narragansett and Bellevue. And so the Mercy sisters said, we don't need three high schools competing with each other. So by the end of World War II, they're down to two schools, both grammar schools, St. Mary's and St. Augustine's. Well, little did anyone know they were about to expand their presence and profile in Newport dramatically. The sisters had obtained a state charter for a college in 1934. They had already picked a name for it, Salve Regina. They had already started assembling books for the library. All they were missing was a campus. Now, of course, they got their charter in 1934 in the depths of the Depression, so I'm not sure about the thinking there. But the driving force behind the establishment of the school was Mother Hilda Miley. Mother Hilda had pressed for the state charter. She had come up with the name because she regularly recited the Salve Regina prayer. The Salve Regina prayer refers to the Virgin Mary as Mother of Mercy, Hail Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. So she thought that was perfect. Mother Hilda was an academic. She had a PhD in English literature from Boston College and had served as principal of St. Xavier's in Providence. So she's a perfect person, right? Well, Mother Hilda and the other leaders of the community were frustrated with their lack of progress in finding a campus. One of her collaborators was Mother Mary Matthew Doyle, who was provincial in the 1930s. In 1936, Mother Mary Matthew wrote to the head of the Mercy Order in Maryland and said, "The opening of the college seems as far distant as ever. We must wait for a millionaire to open his treasures to us before we can begin." Another decade would pass before that millionaire opened his treasures, and it wasn't where they were looking. Newport was 50 miles from the sisters' mother house, which was up in Cumberland, Rhode Island. And at this time, Newport was really hard to access. If one were coming from Jamestown, how would you get here from Jamestown?
Ferry.
Ferry, right? You wait for that ferry, or you miss the last ferry, right? Newport Bridge won't be up until 1969, right? So this is 1940s. Still, when the sisters heard that Robert Golette had offered Ochre Court to the Bishop of Providence, they were very interested. They toured the property with the bishop in March 1947, not only agreed to take the property, but said they would open that fall, 6 months. This would require an incredibly fast turnaround as the sisters began accepting applications from prospective freshmen, lined up an architect who would put into the mansion dorm rooms, classrooms, a chapel, a library, a dining room, a biology lab, faculty offices, and living spaces for the 8 nuns who would be teaching there, all in 6 months. The sisters were in the servants' quarters, and I don't know if you thought about that, but if you were looking at the front door of Ochre Court, and then if you were to look off to the left, kind of near where the parking lot is, there's a small door, right? So that would be the servants' entrance, so that's going to be the sisters' entrance. They've got their own dining room there, and their own room, but I'm assuming pretty tight space there. Well, the architect had to put all these different rooms in the building, but he also had to winterize the property. And of course, the building's made of limestone. And the walls, I think, were supposed to be 3 foot thick. I mean, it's massive walls. I mean, nobody, I think the people building it never imagined that that would be a year-round residence. So amazingly, the school opened as scheduled in September 1947 to 58 freshmen. While pleased with the transformation of Overcourt, the sisters worried about where they put the next class, because they only accepted freshman class, right? They didn't have 4 years, they just had 58 students. Their problem was eased when the Golettes visited campus after Christmas break and said, "How are things going?" The sisters served them tea in Overcourt and introduced students to them, and then they admitted they had no idea where they would house the next group of 58 students. The Golettes then said, "Well, we have the stable, which you could have." And they're going to rename the stables Mercy Hall. And of course, that would be what today? Antone Center. So Mercy Hall, they put in labs, they put in a basketball court. I still can't quite envision how the basketball court would have worked, but classrooms and dorm rooms. And then the next acquisition for the college comes just 2 years later when Cornelius Moore, who was Robert Golette's lawyer, and he's the one who actually made the connection in the first place. Let me see. Oh yeah, he's got some nice postcards from 1947. So this is the terrace. Everybody's hanging out on the terrace. And then the athletic ones are on the front part, having some badminton competitions. And one of the things I thought was really interesting about this picture is, you notice the trees that line the front alley, I think it's called, are not there? I thought those trees would have been original, the ones, but no, okay. So they had this whole front, that was really their athletic field, the whole front yard of Overcourt. Okay, let's see. Okay, and here's Cornelius Moore. And that's Moore Hall that he donates, right? Moore Hall, and that becomes a dorm in 1950. So now you've got more space for the students. Well, for the college's first years, the key figure, along with Mother Hilda, was Sister Mary James O'Hare, who was the academic dean. Like Mother Hilda, Sister Mary James was an academic. She had a PhD in literature from Boston College, just like Mother Hilda. And she had served as principal of St. Xavier's, just like Mother Hilda. Sister Mary James was entrusted with all the curricular matters, oversight of student organizations, which courses would count for which majors, who would teach them, which courses would be required for all students to take. This is sounding very familiar, I think, for all of us who've been at core meetings at Salve. So she's really kind of building the curriculum from the ground floor up. So that's Sister Mary James. Unfortunately for Salve, she contracted cancer in the spring of 1953 and resigned abruptly. She passed away in December of that year at the age of 65, a critical loss for the college. She would have played a key role in the college's effort to get accredited. Without Sister Mary James, Mother Hilda put in an application for Salve's accreditation and was rejected. The accrediting team members were impressed in many respects about Salve, but were quite disappointed with Salve's library, which was located in the library room of Overcourt. Can everyone envision that room, that library room? That was pretty small, right? Just a few thousand volumes on its shelves. So, well, in 1955, the college received a game-changing donation when Mrs. Florence Burden donated Vinland to them. Long held by members of the Vanderbilt family, Vinland had 12 acres and included a carriage house, gardener's cottage, and gatehouse along with the main mansion, so 4 buildings on 12 acres. With the acquisition of the mansion, which the sisters would rename Macaulay Hall in honor of Mother Catherine Macaulay, the college now had room to dramatically expand its library. The whole first floor was turned into the library, and the second floor became a dorm. With the change, Mother Hilda knew Salve was ready to reapply to get accredited. And she immediately reapplied. The accreditors were quite pleased with the new library facility, and they granted accreditation in 1956. They just had one quibble when they sent their report. They said the president has to live on campus. Since 1948, Mother Hilda had been living at the Mercy Mother House up in Cumberland and only coming to campus for major events like graduations. She had been leaving, she had delegated responsibility to Sister Mary James, who was really the effective president as academic dean. So Mother Hilda agreed, and in 1957 she moved to campus. For academic advice, Mother Hilda relied heavily on Dr. Roy D. Ferrari, provost of Catholic University of America in Washington. Catholic had an affiliate program where its administrators would mentor leaders at newly founded Catholic colleges to help them get off the ground. When De Ferrari heard that Salve had gotten accredited, he told Mother Hilda, expect your applications to go up sharply. Families would be much more interested in sending their daughters to an accredited college. and DeFerrari was writing applications increased very steadily. You go from about, to check these numbers, around 200, 250 students in the early 50s to the early 60s, you're up to about 600 students. So they literally doubled the enrollment in, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, something like that. By 1960, Mother Hilda was thinking that Salve campus needed to keep pace with the growing enrollment by putting up some new buildings. As she contemplated expansion, she decided to tap some of the wealthy neighbors in the Ochre Point area to see if they would contribute to the college and help defray some of the building costs. In 1960, appeals were sent out to some of Newport's wealthiest residents, Doris Duke, John Jacob Astor, Harvey Firestone. He lived across from Miley in the Orchard. People know that place. John Nicholas Brown, William Vanderbilt, John Rovensky. Mr. Vanderbilt sent in a donation of $100, and Mr. Rovensky offered to donate some of his books to Salve's library once he cleaned them out. The others do not appear to have answered the letter. So $100 and a few books, you know, maybe a handful of books. I think they were hoping for maybe $50,000 or something, so the $100, I don't know, but didn't quite come through. Undaunted, Mother Hilda pressed on, and in 1963 the college obtained the White Home estate on the corner of Narragansett and Ochre Point Avenues, designed by the highly regarded architect John Russell Pope, who would later design the Jefferson Memorial in D.C. Oh, so here's the dental property. Here's the White Home estate, and notice it's on the diagonal, right? I think on the property it's on the diagonal that kind of comes to its T there in the corner. The Italian villa, designed in 1900, had fallen into disrepair, so Mother Hilda decided to demolish it and replace it with a new dining hall and dormitory. In 1965, the new building, which was paid for with federal loans, was complete. Students who had lived in Ochre Court were moved into the new building. So Ochre Court was a dorm until from 47 until 65. The trustees decided to name it for Mother Hilda, right? Who had just retired. Age 81, Mother Hilda had served as president for 16 years and played a critical part in the school's history dating all the way back to the charter in 1934. Ceremonies were held to celebrate the new addition to Salve's campus, the first building constructed by the college. So Miley's the first building Salve built. While the neighbors were invited to tour the building and attend the reception, not all were particularly interested. Mrs. Margaret Brugere, owner of Wakers, sent back a brief note on her letterhead declining to be present at the dedication of the monstrosity you have erected. So here's White Home in 1963, looking kind of sad. It had been, abandoned for a while. And then here's the groundbreaking. So that's Mother Hilda. That's Cornelius Moore next to her. And this is a representative of the bishop. The bishop wasn't there because this is Vatican II. So the bishop is in Rome. So this is his delegate. And then the other sister, so Mother Hilda's got the shuttle. The other sister was the provincial at the time, who came down from Cumberland. Here's what it looked like in 1965. Pretty different, right, from what it is. I mean, there's been several changes to it over the years, but that's Mrs. Brugere's not too happy with the new building. Mrs. Brugere's refusal to attend probably didn't come as a complete shock to the administration. Sister Sheila O'Brien, who was a dean at Salve in the 60s, recalled that Mrs. Brugere would call the police if she saw students crossing her property on their way to class. She was certainly Salve's most challenging neighbor. Mother Hilda died in 1966, shortly after the dedication of Miley Hall. She didn't live to see the completion of Salve's second modern structure, the O'Hare Academic Center, named for Sister Mary James. Dedicated in 1967, the building was principally intended to support the sciences and the nursing program. So biochemistry, nursing, right, that was all the focus there. With these two new buildings, Salve seemed well positioned to continue to grow into the 1970s. Instead, Salve would fall into crisis, racked by financial stress, divisions over the Vietnam War, campus dress codes, visitation policies, and the key question of whether Salve should become fully coeducational or not. Now, I say fully coeducational. The college had a program for police officers. There have been hundreds of police officers who had gone through the program since 1967. But they were kept pretty separate from the traditional undergrad, so you kind of had two things going on at once. The sisters entered into crisis as well as they tried to implement Vatican II's calls to update religious life. In 1965, at a special meeting, the sisters opted to shift to a modified habit And then in the following year, religious names became optional and sisters could switch back to their birth names. Soon the modified habit would become optional, and so would living in convents. Some sisters moved into their own apartments, and others moved out of religious life altogether. Recognizing that the times were unsettled, the Mercy Sisters decided to go with an unconventional choice for their new president in 1968. They picked Sister Mary Christopher O'Rourke, a sociologist with a doctorate from Notre Dame. That's a modified habit, if you notice the difference between what Mother Hilda was wearing. While Sister Christopher taught at Salve since 1949, she was still in her 40s but had no administrative experience, never been a dean or anything else. Yet she seemed well attuned to the times. She was very active in the local community, supporting civil rights with her involvement in the Urban League. And she had founded 2 anti-poverty organizations, Head Start and New Visions for Newport County, both of which are still in existence. A political progressive, here's one sign of her being a political progressive. That's Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. She invited Margaret Mead as a commencement speaker. There's all sorts of people kind of associated with politically progressive causes like Gloria Steinem and Allen Ginsberg, the poet Allen Ginsberg was here. So there are all sorts of people like that. So a political progressive, Sister Christopher was a traditionally minded person as far as the college was concerned. She wanted to retain a dress code, wanted to maintain strict rules with regard to male visitors in the dorms, and she didn't want to move towards full co-education. Her campus policies alienated many students and led some to establish an underground newspaper called The Thorn, which was meant to be a thorn in her side. Other students organized sit-ins and sleep-ins near her office in Ochre Court and demanded her resignation. And with several traditionally male colleges accepting females, Salve's enrollment started to slip. Boston College went co-ed in 1970, and Providence College followed in 1971. With enrollments dipping, deficits increased, and Salve found itself unable to meet the monthly payroll for the faculty in April 1971. A few days, so people got paid once a month for the monthly payroll. A few days later, the college was able to pay the staff. And soon, Sister Christopher was able to secure funding to meet the next faculty payroll and make up the missing faculty payroll. In May, announcing the funding she had received from a bank, Sister Christopher declared triumphantly, "We're here to stay." Several other schools on Aquidneck Island weren't so fortunate in 1971. St. Catherine's Academy, De La Salle Academy, St. Augustine School, Elmhurst Academy in Portsmouth, all shut down in 1971 or 72. St. Mary's Grammar School merged with St. Lucy's and other schools. That's now All Saints Academy, if people don't know that. And another school shut down, Vernon Court, which was on adjacent to us, junior college. That's January 72, so really turbulent times, 71, 72. So Salve weathered that, but damage it had done to Salve's reputation, and enrollments continued to slip as the co-education issue was still not resolved. 1972, pressure was mounting on Sister Christopher to step down. Before submitting her resignation, Sister Christopher made a bold real estate move which would have important consequences. Learning it, the Wakehurst estate was on the market. Mrs. Brugier had actually died in the beginning of '69, so this is 3.5 years and it just sat empty. Sister Christopher decided to put a bid in for it. To raise money, she sold 2 dorms that Salve owned on Bellevue Avenue. She thought getting this 13-acre Wakehurst estate would unify Salve's campus and far outweigh the importance of these 2 separate dorms. They were not close to each other. So this was a key turning point for the college, I think, getting this property, right? This 13 acres, right? And it was a great victory for historic preservation, as the Van Allen family, having trouble selling it, was planning on demolishing the Wakehurst estate, the mansion. In December 1972, Sister Christopher sent in her resignation letter to the chairman of the Board of Trustees, acknowledging that the period of her presidency had been very challenging years. What an understatement, right? I mean, oh my goodness. In January '73, the Board of Trustees set up a committee that would engage in a national search for Sister Christopher's successor. This was the first search in Salve's history. All the prior presidents had been appointed by the sisters. In the spring, the committee settled on a young math professor from Chicago, Sister Lucille McKillop. Like Sister Christopher, Sister Lucille had no administrative experience, never been a dean, never been a provost. What impressed the search committee most, though, was Sister Lucille's confidence and energy. When the question of possibly having to close the college was delicately broached with her, Sister Lucille quickly responded, "Closing will not be an option." In the summer of 1973, Sister Lucille moved to Newport and immediately instituted change. More progressive than Sister Christopher, she no longer wore a habit and had dropped her religious name. Lucille was her birth name, not a religious name. Oh, here's Wakehurst, right? My name is Sister Lucille. She also had no special attachment to single-sex education, and so she pressed the board to declare the college fully coeducational immediately. And they agreed. So she got here in July of 73. By September of 73, the school had become coeducational, fully coeducational. She also moved to offer graduate programs. Sister Christopher had considered graduate education, but had not made any decision. Sister Lucille also started to offer new undergraduate programs that were professional in nature. Accounting, management, social work, programs like that she's going to add. At the same time, Sister Lucille wanted to maintain some traditions, one of which was to continue to have sisters working as faculty and staff. To accomplish this, she actively recruited sisters, brothers, and priests to come to Salve. At a time when most Catholic colleges had few religious, sisters, brothers, and priests comprised more than 40% of the faculty during Sister Lucille's presidency. So there were, maybe when I got here in 1992, 32 sisters and 10 brothers on the faculty then. And the other thing about that is not everyone was a Mercy Sister, so some of the sisters were Franciscans or other communities. In the years following, with enrollments now rising steadily, Sister Lucille faced new challenges, different challenges. They needed more dorm space to house students who wanted to live on campus. By 1980, a perfect opportunity presented itself. The Watts Sherman House on Shepherd Avenue was available for sale. Since 1950, this historic building had housed the Baptist nursing home, and the Baptists had added that wing in the back in the early 60s. That was built the same year that Miley was built, 63. I just wonder what architects were thinking in 1963. This old building looked great if we had put a new nursing home wing here on the back. Wow. Well, the Baptists had to get out because the building was no longer up to code with the health department. So they were getting ready. So here's Watts Sherman, just in front of where we don't have the nursing home wing. And that's where they're moving, down to Valley Road, which becomes the John Clark home. In 1981, Sister Lucille announced that the college was interested in purchasing it and turning it into a dorm. She turned first to the city council for permission. Its members said the college needed to go to the zoning review board. When Sister Therese Antone, the college's vice president for institutional advancement, appeared before that board, she was met by members of the newly formed Ochre Point Association, a group of more than 100 property owners in the neighborhood who opposed the college's development plans. At a 5-hour-long meeting, members of the association complained that the neighborhood was already littered with beer bottles and disrupted by students coming and going late at night. In the end, the zoning board sided with the neighbors, and the issue had to go all the way up to the Rhode Island Supreme Court before Salve was able to purchase Watts Sherman. So that took, it was 1983 before they were able to get that sold. The college faced similar difficulties in trying to build a new dorm on a parcel of land it owned on the Moore estate. Again, the Ochre Point Association members protested that a new dorm would mean more car traffic and more beer bottles. More than 3 years would pass from the time that Salve first appeared before the zoning board before it was able to break ground on the dorm that will be known as Hunt Reed. Along with the new dorm, Sister Lucille realized that the college was in need of a new library. While accreditors had been thrilled with the Macaulay Library in 1956, by 1981 they viewed it as inadequate, with not enough books and not enough study space for students. There were also structural problems with the building because you had the weight of all the books, on the floors, and there were those issues. Realizing that Salve needed a new library, Sister Lucille tasked her provost, Sister Sheila Megley, with designing a state-of-the-art library, and she directed Sister Therese to launch the school's first ever capital campaign to pay for it. With the help of Michael Semenza, who was an outside consultant, Sister Therese worked to raise $5 million in this capital campaign. That's Sister Sheila Megley. And this is a nice picture, I think. This is breaking ground on the Wakehurst field for the new library. And you can see they both have hard hats on, Sister Lucille and Sister Sheila. And I don't know if anybody can make out Paul McKillop in the background on the right. No? Okay. Construction began on the library in 1989, was completed in the spring of 1991, just as the accreditors were coming for their 10-year campus visit. This was amazing. The accrediting team was coming, and literally the doors were just opening. Sister Lucille had this great idea. She said, why don't you make this your headquarters for your meeting, right? So they could spread out here in this new library. While the neighbors had little to say about the new library, controversy broke out once more in 1991 when Sister Sheila decided to lower the Wakehurst wall from 8 feet to 3 feet. Concerned about student safety, Sister Sheila worried about students leaving the new library at night, possibly getting mugged by people hiding behind the walls. She was also worried about the stability of the wall. The wall was deteriorating in parts. As stonemasons began to lower the wall, the city filed suit in Superior Court to block the proceedings, and Solvay's critics took to the pages of the Newport Daily News to lament the college's latest actions. One Daily News columnist, Leonard Pinaggio, spoke of the horrible modification of the once beautiful wall which surrounded Solvay Regina's Wakehurst. And Countess Zapari, who lived on the top floor of the breakers, she was at Vanderbilt, spoke of the tragedy of the Wakehurst wall. At the same time, some community members wrote to express support for Solvay, noting that the college had tastefully lowered the wall, not gotten rid of it, just lowered it, and made it safer for students and others to walk by at night, right? Undaunted by the controversy, Sister Lucille pressed ahead. With the opening of an impressive new library, she decided to officially change Solvay's name. With the expansion of graduate programs in the 1980s, there had been a call by some faculty members to rename the school. Now, with the opening of the library, Sister Lucille felt justified in 1991 to announce that Solvay Regina had become a university. So to return where we started, hundreds of Mercy Sisters have served in Newport since 1854 when Mother Xavier sailed down with that group of 4. While initially receiving a friendly reception, over the years the sisters actually faced increasing challenges. So the opposite of what I would have expected. From the Navy on one side of Newport, shutting them down, shutting their orphanage down, and the Ochre Point Association on the other. Even so, the sisters have been able to accomplish much, touching the lives of many at their schools, their academy, their orphanage, and their college. Thank you. Here we've got some pictures of Sister Trace and Tom. And now this is something interesting too. This is one of the Indian sisters. I don't know if you see the sister with the white jacket on. The Indian sisters used to work in the Solvay library. They typically 2 sisters each year. And Sister Trace in the foreground. Okay.
We'd love to hear questions that you would like.
John, fantastic talk. I just have enjoyed over the years coming in with my lectures behind your lectures and arriving a little bit early to catch the tail end of yours. And to get a full lecture is really a treat. Thank you. I have 2 questions, and you don't have to answer either of them. Maybe we can talk about them later. But 2 things come to mind. So the first one is when you talk about the 70s and the crisis the university was facing, and we talk about the demographic cliff today, I would say that was like a demographic tsunami in the 70s. So how did we survive that, and how does it reflect on our future? That's the first question.
Okay.
The second question I have is how does a historian look backwards, and then how do we think forwards? So from my own perspective as a faculty member, when I think about the core curriculum, you just described the previous core as being very much a top-down process by Sister O'Hare, who was really driving our past core curriculum. And yet today, it's mostly bottom-up. Faculty very, very involved in coming up with this. Will the future look back and say that Kelly Armstrong came up with a core curriculum that we have today, or will it reflect back and say the faculty largely derived the core curriculum? So those are 2 questions. I don't know if you have an answer.
Yeah, okay, those are really good, Tim. Thank you. I mean, so the first question about like Solvay in 1971 versus Solvay in 2024, the financial crisis was much more severe in 1971. And here to see all those schools that folded in that time, I mean, that was very, very serious. And I mean, at this point, Solvay didn't have an endowment, no endowment at all. You know, so it really wasn't the kind of cushion. So you really are worried about if you lose 50 students or something. That's something really dramatic. So So yeah, I think that was really, really great. That was a key point to, and Sister Christopher, for all the criticism she gets, she deserves credit for navigating and getting through there. And of course, you know, buying Wakers, that was a key move to really sort of create a unified campus. So yeah, I think these issues are not, you know, we're here versus there in terms of severity. And then how would people look at it? I would think they'd look back on this time realistically and say that faculty did it, and you know, they would say that yeah, clearly there's been a change with faculty governance. And I didn't get into that at all, but we started having faculty senate in the 70s, and so that's sort of the start of real governance. You have a ranking tenure committee that's put in, because you really don't have any of that until really after that crisis in the mid-70s. You start to have ranking tenure, faculty senate, more issues of governance. Of course, that's just increased over the years, and that's a good thing. Thomas got a question over there.
John, you mentioned student newspaper
Yeah.
from the 60s and early 70s, maybe.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, were there things there that surprised you?
In terms of content?
I'm sorry?
In terms of the content?
Yeah.
I've only seen a few of them. The archives had a few issues, and they were kind of handmade things, and they had like a mimeograph machine that they, you know, run off the copies, and they were pretty snarky. You know, they really went after Sister Christopher. They would draw caricatures of her, and they were tough on her. You know, we don't have them anymore. I think our archives decided to, I think, got rid of them at some point, but there were some.
The archives has some.
I don't think so. I mean, I saw them in archives that was years ago, but I haven't seen them in a long time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's somewhere that, but.
I'd be horrified if we got rid of something like that, but Liza will get on that.
Okay. Fine.
I just have a more general question about, first of all, thank you.
Sure, thanks for coming.
The Catholic schools that closed in Newport in the 70s, so my perspective is from like the Rust Belt cities, because that's where I'm from. And in the 70s, Catholic schools were almost in their heyday in terms of enrollment, and the churches as well. So what was going on in Newport specifically that caused the schools to close at that time?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, my initial thought was it had to do with the Navy pulling out, you know, because you have that massive loss of kids, and but that's 73. And I mean, these shutdowns were 71, but that predates the Navy pulling out. So anyway, I don't really know, but it's funny. It seems like there was sort of a domino effect. I mean, once one of these schools closed, the other ones did. But again, I guess like we were saying to Jim, like none of these schools had endowments. You know, they all just kind of relied on enrollments from year to year, and if the enrollments got wobbly for whatever reason. I mean, maybe, you know, might have had to do with that these were single-sex high schools, too. Like, Elmhurst was all girls in Portsmouth, and maybe there were issues that people didn't want to do that anymore. So I think there were those kind of questions, and there was never much of a margin to help, you know, cushion you if you had a bad year. But, yeah, I don't know, but you're probably right, though. There's probably some unique Newport factors that explain that's a lot of schools in like a 12-month period that's all going out. So I have to work on it.
Thanks.
Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. That was wonderful. I'm curious about your perspective. This is more like opinion based, but the history of like the relationship with Salve and the neighbors is clearly, there's lots of drama. I'm wondering if you feel that a presentation like this would be worth it for them to hear, like the neighbors that we have now. Do you think it would change their perspective a bit about the benefit of having Salve in this town?
Oh. That'd be touchy, I think. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's kind of interesting that these problems are still here, right? I mean, issues of building the dorms, I mean, that's what I realized as I got further into it. Like, I was thinking that was a new problem, you know, with trying to build the new dorms, and then you go back to 1960, this was going on. And so, yeah, I don't know. And you wonder, maybe there's another side to this too. Like here, I mean, I'm going through the Salve archives and getting the Salve administration's view. I mean, as opposed to what their account would be. I mean, maybe some of the things they were complaining about are true. I mean, maybe in the 70s, people were speeding up and down these streets and drinking beer and throwing cigarette butts in people's yards. And maybe they were, right? I mean, yeah, that's huge. But also, I mean, I know there's a lot of town-gown rivalries in places, and I think the fact that Salve's campus isn't separate. I mean, the fact that we have private homes mixed in, I mean, I think it's probably logical that there's going to be conflict. You know, it's not like we're a set-aside campus. We've got neighbors all inside our borders, so it's probably not that surprising, but I still was surprised at how many times it seemed to come up. I mean, so many issues. I mean, like here, the Wakehurst Wall, I mean, goodness. Wow. I mean, these letters, people are just mourning this, you know, horrible loss of the Wakehurst Wall. But if that was like, you know, some incredible historic structure, you know. Sure.
I have a question. First of all, the service that you've done in uncovering all this history, I mean, having read the twins, the Tobin sisters account, it's a very different, as a trained historian, you've taken this in such a different direction. Sorry, thank you. And I wondered, kind of going off of that, if you could share a bit about your process, because, so a couple of years, for the 75th, I was in the archives trying to piece together a 75th display with a student, and your conclusions are so much richer and have brought together, like the way that you form a narrative is it's so skillful, and I wonder how you get, what your process is in developing those insights. For example, the difficulties that the different presidents had, and sort of like how you frame them. What is your process in developing that?
Wow, thanks. I think that's so nice what you're saying. Well, I mean, the archives has a great collection. It's very well organized. And so there's presidential papers, there's papers for the Board of Trustees meetings, and then all these administrators have papers that you can go through, and it's all very well organized. And then so many newspapers are digitized now, which has made research so much easier. So I mean, the Newport Daily News, Providence Journal, I mean, I can look at an event that I know is major in Salve in 1968 and see, well, did this make it in the news? Was this or just stuff like this, the Wakehurst Wall, was that actually in the news, or was this an in-house issue? So having that, and then I just try to read up on the times too. I mean, because I think to talk about the troubles in the 60s, I have to read on the Vietnam War. How is that affecting the country as a whole, right? Or what are some of the changes in colleges generally? So I'm trying to read on that as well. So I guess it's three pieces that I'm trying to put together. But I feel like it's great to have this collection here downstairs, and, so well organized. And then have all these digitized newspapers to work for and try to combine somehow.
I was especially interested in your conclusions about Sister Christopher and how she was a political progressive, because I found this image in the yearbook of Gloria Steinem and who was with her, another huge figure in like women's and racial rights.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
But there was no context I could find anywhere about it.
Yeah.
But you were able to connect that Sister Christopher was a political progressive,
right,
and that she was sort of behind having all of these interesting people come to campus.
She was supportive of it anyway. She wasn't opposed. I'm not saying she was an organizer of it, but that's nice. I mean, she was a sociologist, and sociology in the 60s tended to be kind of involved with progressive causes too. But I compare her to Father Hesburgh at Notre Dame, if people are familiar with that theater he was very much involved in progressive causes like the Civil Rights Commission and, you know, working with Martin Luther King. And he ran a very tight ship at Notre Dame. So he ran, you know, he wanted to keep Notre Dame very traditional. So he had the 15-minute rule, you know, during Vietnam, if students protested for more than 15 minutes, he was calling the police and you'd be removed from campus. So I mean, he was, and so she's sort of the same way. She wants to kind of keep the campus kind of a tight ship. She wants, like, she doesn't want full co-education. She wants very strict rules about who's visiting the dorms and when, those kind of things. And yet, at the other hand, she's involved with civil rights activism and Newport and all that. So she's a complicated person, like everybody's complicated, I suppose. But she was compared in the archives. People wrote and said, "You're like Father Hesper," and she said, "I take that as a compliment, right?" That she sort of that she was kind of a combination.
What that's telling me is that you have a ton of content knowledge in all these areas, and that's how you can draw these conclusions, probably. But in any case, does anybody else have any other questions?
Sister Betty, you want to throw in anything about the Mercy Sisters we left out or needs to be thrown in?
Thank you. I don't think I want to add anything to that. I lived through a lot of those times. I was, you know, she was the president when I was a student here.
Right, okay.
But we were very protected. I mean, one of the stories you didn't tell is that the sisters who were studying on campus couldn't be associated with any of the students. We had to study separately. We couldn't go to had to have special permission, I think, to go to the library in Macaulay to study if you wanted to. We had to study in the boiler room down in Ochre Court, which now has a big sign on it that says, "No admission, asbestos," or something. So that made me a little nervous, right? But most of what you're saying, I remember, and yeah, Christopher was a controversial figure at that time, yeah. And she had a hard time because it was the 70s and everybody was in uproar. And certainly Lucille did an amazing job. You know, I was teaching here when she was president, as you were. And she had a lot to deal with, but she recovered it. And was Wakehurst, Mrs. Bruguiere hated us. So we know she's turning over in her grave, thinking that we're on her property now. You just feel it. But I mean, it's amazing. And you know, Trace's idea too, when she built this, was to make it, I think she said to the architects, "I want it to be similar to Wakehurst,
Right.
so that it would look like it fit in." And I think they've done a nice job with that. But yeah, it's a strong history and a strong tribute to all of the people who've been involved, I think, to make it what it is today. And we'll continue with those challenges. But thank you for putting it all together. I appreciate it. I think, as Dawn said, I think you did a nice job in using what you found, but putting your own history into it and your own flavor to the process.
Thanks.
I just have a quick question, kind of in response to your question about the Catholic schools locally closing, and I wonder if it might have something to do with larger regional schools that, like Prout, I'm thinking. I don't know when Prout came to be, but that's not that far from here. Maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe it wasn't so much that the smaller schools were closing, but that larger.
Yeah.
Mid-60s for Prout.
I'm wondering, I don't really know the answer to your question either. I don't know your answer to your question either, Tracy, but I'm wondering if it had something to do with the communities, because the Sisters of St. Joseph did St. Catherine's, and the brothers,
Christian Brothers did.
the Christian brothers were doing that, and they were in Narragansett, so I don't know. I don't know if it had anything to do with that, or the opening of, you know, I don't know, because I don't know a lot of, I'm going to talk to some of the people I know who graduated from St. Catherine's and see if they know what caused it to close. Yeah.
You know?
No.
Prout opened in 1966.
Well, this is an ongoing conversation, and your research is continuing on the South Bay
Still working on
history.
it.
So
Years ago.
we are really looking forward to your presentation on that one. And again, thank you. Oh, did you have a question? Thank you.
Hi. I've lived in this neighborhood since 1973. And on the peripherals, I've gone through all of this with Salve and the Preservation Society. And a lot of complaints by the richer patrons that live in the area. But by and large, the school and the preservation have added so much to Newport that you would otherwise never have. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's it.
Well, that was a great way to close. Thank you. And thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll continue this conversation about Dr. Quinn's huge act of service in doing this research and putting it to print over snacks. And I hope that you will also consider joining us for our next faculty lecture, which is Jody Menfidno on October. I have it open, except I forgot my glasses. The title of her lecture is Minding the Gap, Personal Photographs, Institutional Archives, and Visual Literacy in the Classroom. And it is October 24th, right here from 4 to 5:30. So thank you again, Dr. Quinn.